I will tell you, when I first lived in Germany, every time I saw an older German whose hair was gray enough that I knew he must have been alive back during this time, I did a lot of this in my mind. I pointed fingers at older Germans, and I thought to myself, your hair is gray enough, you're old enough, where were you when this was going on? How much of this did you know? How could you not have known? I spent years pointing fingers of condemnation at the nation of Germany, the whole country, and the nation of Austria, and the many other nations who were complicit with the Nazis in furthering the Holocaust. One example, France. The government of occupied France rounded up their Jews, packed them into trains, and sent them to Germany. Here, take our Jews, go ahead. Many other nations did similar things. I spent years pointing fingers of condemnation to such countries. How could you people as a nation have been so evil to allow this to happen? I don't do a whole lot of this anymore. I gave up doing most of this a number of years ago, and how that happened to me I'll tell you about in the second part of this message. What you're going to hear today is in two parts. In part one, I take you on a journey. I try to help you understand more fully what happened in the Holocaust. A lot of students your age write to me. A lot of what you told me in part one I'd heard before, but I never heard it like this. I hope it impacts you that way as well. Then we'll take a break here for lunch, I understand. And then after lunch I want to come back and talk to you about why should you and I care about something that happened on the other side of the world more than half a century ago. I have little doubt there are those of you sitting here right now with the same thought running through your head that the 8th grader wrote to me 8 to 10 years ago. She said, when you first came to our school, I thought this was just going to be another part of lame history. A friend went to Washington, D.C. some years ago. I said, did you go to the Holocaust Museum while you were out there? He said, you know, I planned to. I had it on my list, but I got out there and I crossed it off. I didn't go. I said, why not? He said, the more I thought about it, it's history. It's over. Let it lie. Move on. Now I'll get a response like this. They'll kind of laugh and they'll go, Holocaust? You? What's your connection to that? You're not Jewish, are you? You didn't lose any family in that story, did you? And then they'll say something like this. You know, when is enough enough? You know, haven't we had enough books written, documentaries produced, movies made, speeches given, museums set up, foundations established, memorials founded, and all that Holocaust stuff? I mean, really, when is it time to shut up and quit whining about the past and move on? Well, obviously, I don't believe this is lame history, nor do I think it ever should be considered that. Nor do I think we've done enough with this stuff, nor do I think we should shut up and quit whining and move on. Because obviously, if I did believe any of that, I wouldn't be here. I'd be back down in St. Croix County practicing law. So that's what I'll hit you with in part two. Why must we care? Why should we never forget? And what does this so-called lame history have to say to you and me as Americans? And specifically to you as the 8th grade class at Spooner Middle School, 2010-2011. That's what I'll hit you with in part two. All right, before we jump into part one and what happened, I need to make sure we're all on the same page of history. I'm just going to give you a quick timeline here. The major dates, this is just part of my intro, stay with me. When we talk about the Holocaust, we're talking about a 12-year period of history from 1933 to 1945. Quick timeline here, January of 33, the Minister-President of Germany, Paul von Hindenburg, names Adolf Hitler Chancellor of Germany. The Nazi Party comes to power in Germany. 6.5 years later, September of 39, Germany invades Poland. World War II begins. A year and a half after that, in June of 1941, Germany invades the Soviet Union. The war expands greatly into the east. 6 months after that, in December of 1941, the United States is attacked at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii by the Japanese. Within a week of Pearl Harbor, Germany and Italy had declared war on the United States. Why? Because they had a treaty with Japan. They were allied with Japan. So the United States got involved in World War II right at the end of 1941. 3 years and a few months later, in May of 1945, you have the collapse of the Third Reich in Germany. The war in Europe ends. A few months later, the atom bombs are dropped in Hiroshima, Nagasaki, Japan. Japan surrenders and World War II ends. 1933 to 45, 12 years during which another event took place that we now call the Holocaust. One time in a middle school down in St. Paul, I asked the students, what was the Holocaust anyway? An 8th grader said, it's what the Nazis did. I said, what do you mean, what they do? He said, they killed an awful lot of people. I said, who did they kill? He said, Jewish people. I said, how many? He knew the number we most often hear. He said, 6 million. We're not sure of that number. When numbers get up that big, it's hard to be precise. But the lowest credible estimate I've seen of the number of Jewish deaths in the Holocaust is in the range of 5.1 million. So somewhere 5.1 to 6 million Jews killed in this event. Picture a big target up here on the screen. Put a red bullseye in the center of that target. And now imagine that three-letter word right in the center of that bullseye, J-E-W, Jew. I am suggesting to you is that's how the Nazis viewed the world. They took aim and they targeted Jews more than any other group. They went after them with more hatred, more organization and efficiency than anyone else, and that's why you have 5.1 to 6 million Jewish victims. Point number two, they did not only target Jews. Although Jews were at the center of their target, many other groups were on that target as well. You've studied this topic, this history, I assume you know some of those. What are some of the other groups the Nazis hunted in this Holocaust? Yeah? Yes, the Romani, people more commonly referred to as gypsies, they were targeted. Yes, the handicapped, the disabled, whether mentally or physically, back there, yep. Other political parties, if you were a communist, a socialist, or a social democrat, you could have been targeted, yep. Homosexuals were targeted. I often get that answer, blacks. The Nazis had a racial hierarchy in how they viewed the world. It was a twisted view. Blacks didn't rank very highly on their view of the world. Had blacks been in the regions the Nazis conquered, there's little doubt they would have been targeted. They weren't. So blacks are not a victim group of this Holocaust. Others, yeah? What's that? The elderly. If you were too old, too weak, too sickly, you easily could have been targeted. Yes? Jehovah's Witnesses were targeted, that's true. POWs, you're right, we got to qualify that. Soviet prisoners of war. If they weren't gunned down at the front after they surrendered, most of them ended up in the death camps. American, British, French, Canadian prisoners of war, most of them ended up in POW camps, run by a whole different set of rules. There was a special hatred for Soviet prisoners of war. Most of them ended up in the death camps. Others, yeah? To some extent that's true. Catholics, Protestants, priests, ministers, other religious faiths could have become targets. I'll say more about that in a minute. Anybody else? You got most of them. You can see you've been well educated in this topic, which is great. Some cases, trade union leaders were targeted. Teachers, professors, government leaders could have become targets. A group we often forget about, the rescuers. The Anne Frank story. If you hit a Jew in your attic or your barn, you and your entire family were subject to arrest and most likely the death penalty at the hands of the Gestapo. All right, how many of all these groups died? We really don't know. I have seen ballpark estimates in the 2 to 4 million range. Add that to the 5.1 to 6 million Jews, now we're in the range of 7 to 10 million human beings. 7 to 10 million human beings. Let me go back to that statement I gave you here a few minutes ago and let's fill in the blank. Tens of thousands of people actively engaged in the murder of 7 to 10 million human beings. That was the Holocaust. Now, before I go any further in my intro, let's separate those 7 to 10 million into two groups. Over here, let's put these groups. Jews, gypsies, homosexuals, Jehovah's Witnesses, and disabled individuals. If you're one of these groups over here that I just named, one of these, it didn't matter how well you could make the Nazi salute. It didn't matter that you could say Sieg Heil or Heil Hitler with perfect German, without a touch of a foreign accent. It didn't matter how sharp you looked in one of their uniforms, how many of their medals you won. They hunted you, and once they found out you're one of these, no matter how often you did this, no matter how perfectly you shouted Sieg Heil, it meant nothing. The uniform was torn off, you were hauled away to a death camp, and millions of you lost your lives. Over here, let's put these groups. Catholics, Protestants, priests, ministers, other religious faiths, communists, socialists, social democrats, trade union leaders, teachers, professors, government leaders, all these groups over here. As long as you did this when they told you to, as long as you said Heil Hitler when the rules said you should, but much more importantly over here, as long as you kept your mouth shut when you knew you'd better. Don't tell me where those cattle cars crammed full of people are going that I see almost every day on my way to work. I really don't want to know. Just give me my paycheck. Let me go on holiday a few times a year. Don't mess with me or my stuff. And I'll play a little game. And I'll pretend I don't see those cattle cars. Because sadly, I don't think they affect me. Tragically, millions chose to play this role over here.